everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a really interesting legal puzzle. We're going to try and crack the code on something called frustration of contract. So, imagine this. You sign a contract, everything is good to go, and then wham, something totally out of the blue happens. Maybe it's a fire, maybe a brand new law, or even some huge global event. So, can you just walk away? Well, the answer to that lies in a much bigger question. What does it actually take to legally frustrate a contract?
Our whole deep dive today is really about solving one specific puzzle. We need to figure out the correct set of principles for contract frustration. And that means we don't just have to find the right answer. We need to understand exactly why all the other options are wrong.
So, let's get into this contractual conundrum. Think of us as detectives for the next few minutes. We're going to sift through all the evidence, look at all the options, and figure out which legal principles are the real deal.
Okay, so here's the setup. We've got 4 potential answers in our lineup. Now, 3 of them, they're clever decoys, right? They're red herrings designed to look correct and trip us up. Our job is to see through them and find that one true set of principles. All right, so here's our strategy. To find the right answer, we're actually going to start by looking at the wrong ones. It's kind of like a process of elimination. Once we understand what doesn't work, it's going to give us a way clearer picture of what does. Let the investigation begin. All right, here we go. Suspect number 1 is on the stand. Now, it's got some fancy legal-sounding words in there for sure, but there are a couple of clues here that should immediately tell you something is just not right. Let's break down the biggest flaws. First off, let's just look at that phrase, minor difference. Look, the law really isn't concerned with small bumps in the road. If a contract gets a little more expensive or a bit inconvenient to carry out, that's not enough. For this doctrine to even apply, the change has to be radical. We're talking so profound that it's just not the deal anyone actually signed up for anymore. And right here, this is the biggest giveaway for suspect number 1. Absolute possibility. I mean, if something is possible, well, then it's not impossible, right? The entire foundation of frustration is that the contract cannot be performed. So this option literally contradicts the main idea. Okay, suspect number 1 is officially busted. Okay, let's bring in our second suspect. And again, this one is trying to trick us with some clever language. We see complete possibility, which, we just debunked. But let's focus on another flawed term in here, prior legality. Well, of course the contract was legal when it was made. I mean, if it wasn't, it would have been void from the very beginning. That's not what we're talking about here. The concept that actually matters is supervening illegality. That means a new law comes into play after the agreement was signed, making it illegal to perform. The timing here is absolutely everything. So suspect number 2, you're out. And on to our third and final incorrect option. Now this one gets a little closer. It uses terms like fundamental difference and subsequent illegality, which sound pretty good, but it's got its own fatal flaws. Let's start with partial impossibility. You have to understand, the standard for frustration is incredibly high. Partial impossibility just isn't going to cut it. Think of it like a game of Jenga. Just because you pull out one block doesn't mean the whole tower is coming down. A court is probably going to say, well, the rest of the contract still stands. The law demands absolute impossibility, where the entire foundation has just crumbled away. So by knocking out all the red herrings, we've basically worked our way to the correct answer. Now that we've cleared away all that confusion, let's actually look at the 4 true legal principles of frustration one by one. First up, absolute impossibility. Now, this isn't about something being difficult or more expensive. It means performance is literally, objectively impossible. So, for example, say you have a contract to rent a specific concert hall, and the day before the show, that hall burns to the ground. The contract just can't be fulfilled. It's physically impossible. Second, we have radical difference. This is where the situation has changed so drastically that to fulfill the contract now would mean doing something completely different from what was originally intended. Let's say you have a contract to ship goods through a specific sea route, but that route suddenly becomes a war zone. Yeah, you could still ship them by going all the way around an entire continent, but that would take so much longer and cost so much more that it's a radically different job. It's not what you agreed to. Our third principle is supervening illegality. And like we talked about, this one is all about the timing. The contract was totally legal when it was signed, but then a new law or some government action makes it illegal to carry out. Imagine a contract to import a certain product, and suddenly the government puts a total ban on it. Game over. The contract is now illegal to complete. And finally, we have futility. Now, this one is pretty close to radical difference, but here's the key distinction. You can still technically perform the action, but it has completely lost its point. The classic law school example is this. You rent a room with a balcony specifically to watch a king's coronation parade. But then, the parade gets canceled because the king gets sick. You can still rent the room, sure, but the whole reason for the contract is gone. It's futile. So, there we have it. Case cracked? Let's put all 4 of these principles together one last time just to really lock in what we've learned today. Here is the final verdict. These are the 4 pillars of frustration: absolute impossibility, radical difference, supervening illegality, and futility. And together, they create this incredibly high bar that a situation has to clear for a contract to be legally frustrated. And there's a good reason that bar is so high. It's to protect the certainty and reliability of business agreements. So why does this rule even exist? Well, this quote really gets to the heart of it. Contracts are supposed to be absolute. You're supposed to do what you say you're going to do. But sometimes, life throws a curveball that is so extreme that forcing people to go through with the deal would just be fundamentally unfair. Frustration is that special, very rare exception that plain old justice demands. And that brings us to the end. We've laid out all the principles, but that just leaves one final question, and this one's for you. Looking at the world today, what kind of major event do you think would be radical enough to actually count? Something to think about. Thanks so much for watching.